So, welcome back to another Thursday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm your Thursday host, Yeka, and this week we have been talking about, at least the title is mental health and our practices. So, our question comes from Francisco, and you can read the full description below. So, I've been really excited about this topic, but it's kind of a tricky one for me to tackle. So I haven't fully watched the other hosts' videos on this yet. I did kind of skim through to see what the general approach was that they were taking, and I think that I'm going to take this in a kind of different direction. So the thing about this question was the words that were used could mean so many different things. Um, they didn't specifically specify which mental health issues. Um, and so what that means, is kind of left up to our interpretation. And also a shrink, whether the shrink is a psychotherapist or a counselor, um, was also left a little bit vague. I interpret it as somebody who's that word to mean more like a psychiatrist or psychotherapist, which is going to have a very different professional culture, excuse me, towards the people that they are working with, than perhaps somebody who is a licensed social worker as a counselor, or each state has very different, not very different, but has many different types of licensing, and different countries I would assume have as well, and there's different kind of attitudes within that. But what I wanted to do with this is talk about a realm that often gets lumped into mental health. And sort of about our cultural attitudes toward that. And when I say cultural, I know that there's a lot of different people from many different cultures that watch these videos. I'm talking in a very, very broad sense of sort of umbrella metaculture of Western civilization, and our attitude towards normal, healthy, and mainly that we have uh, this framework or paradigm that we are typically operating from that assumes that there is one right way for a brain to be or work, one healthy way, one normal way. And that isn't the only framework which exists. And I happen to subscribe, I suppose you could say, or uh, use a different framework for that. Now, that framework is often called the pathology paradigm, which looks at things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, things like that as pathologies, as disorders, as things that are not normal and not healthy. Now, there's another type of framework that we can use that is an option, which is called the neurodiversity framework. And if this is a new topic or new subject to you, I'm going to put some links in the description, and I really, really encourage and invite you to do a little bit of reading and research on this. I think that it's really beautiful, powerful stuff, even if you actually, especially if you're somebody who identifies as neurotypical. So let me back up with that. That term, okay, this is such a big topic. I'm kind of getting lost on where I'm at with the explanation of it. So this framework, the framework has that there are of neurodiversity, that there are different types of brains, and obviously no two individual brains are the same, but there isn't one type of brain which is the normal, healthy, correct type of brain, that there are actually lots of different ones. And we could use the metaphor of computer or machine to talk about brain, which we often do, and say that wired, that different brains are wired differently, and there are different kind of categories of wiring. Or I like the analogy of brains as ecosystems, that there are different types of ecosystems. And some terminology that we use to talk about that is somebody who, lots of different ones. So brains are neurodiverse. There are different kinds of brains. And there is a majority that is a type or kind of a narrow category or group of brains, which we call neurotypical. And that's sort of akin to saying the importance of that is in the same way that it's important to have a term for cisgendered or a term for heterosexual, instead of saying that those are normal people, that, oh, it's normal to be cis or it's normal to be straight, that those are just versions and types of ways of being, and that although they are majorities, they're one way and they're not necessarily the um, only way, right? And so some of the minority, if you're not necessarily neurotypical, the other word for that would be that you are neurodivergent, because everybody is neurodiverse, right? We're part of a neurodiverse community of beings, of human beings. Or that there are specific groups which are neurominorities, like dyslexia is a neurominority. So this whole subject is one subject that kind of gets wrapped into mental health, and usually in the mainstream approached as I was saying, that these things are as though they're bad or disorders, and even the language that we use to talk about them indicates our attitude towards them, that it's somehow these are bad things, that it's not okay. We talk about cures for them, we talk about treatment for them, as opposed to recognizing them as distinct and just different ways of being. And a lot of society is set up in such a way that it caters specifically to people who are neurotypical and doesn't really take into account other ways of being. And often those other ways of being, when it's discovered that somebody is different, there are therapies to try to fix them or cure them or treat them or make them behave in a more neurotypical way, make them pass as neurotypical, make them behave as neurotypical, as opposed to recognizing that that's just what that person is, and creating a society in which there's room for everybody and there's room for different kinds of brains and different ways of interacting with the world. So this topic, of course, is important to me because I am neurodivergent, and so there have been times in my life where the way that my brain works is kind of different, and it's been challenging because things aren't set up that way, in a way that they're set up in a way that is a lot easier for somebody whose brain works a little bit different than mine does. And, I was blessed from the family that I had that it was not made a negative thing and never discussed as a disability, but seen as a difference to which I had certain strengths and weaknesses and was a different, that just had different ways of interacting and therefore needed different tools and different skills to deal with different situations. I think that unfortunately, though, often that's not the approach that a lot of families take. And I think it's a real big issue with children, where they are sent to behavioral, they're medicated, depending on what it is, because there's so many different ways to be neurodivergent, but they're medicated or sent to corrective behavioral therapies and things like that, which I think is really tricky because it violates their cognitive liberties and tries to force them into being a certain way, which may not be what they are. And one of the things that happens with that, again, I'm speaking in generalizations, this isn't every single situation, but those individuals really lose autonomy of themselves and the way that their brains work or our brains work. And authority is taken by these figures, whether those are, and this could be happening with children or adults or whatever. And I think our culture kind of encourages it, go to the authority, they give a diagnosis and a prescription or whatever. And our personal power is taken away, and we don't have that same, again, that autonomy or that cognitive liberty that I was talking about. Again, I'll put some links in the description box about some of these concepts if these terms are new. So I want to be clear that I'm not saying that I don't think that therapists, that I think that therapists are bad or that aren't helpful or things like that, but I think that there's some more problematic things that happen, that can happen with, boundaries of authority and the way that we are taught to behave towards our own differences and things that we're experiencing. Now, I'm talking about this specific field, but I think that applies to other things as well, like things that could also be classified as mental health, like depression or PTSD or things like that, where the behavior towards it is very, very disempowering. So continuing with the question, so in terms of if we have experienced that, and I did mention that I do have some neurological differences, and to share, like one of them for me is that I have some sensory processing differences. So the way that I experience certain sounds and certain tactile sensations is different than what the majority of people do. For instance, like my partner experiences this, we can be listening to the same kind of sounds, and my experience of it is typically much more intense, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the way that I relate to that is different. So the type of tools that I use and when I need to use those tools might be a little bit different. And again, I don't see that as this isn't a bad thing. It's not, it's not, I think one of the words in here was like tainting. It's not like that. It's just understanding myself as an individual and some of the issues that I need to deal with and the strengths that I have. So magical tools in terms of, meditation, and sometimes using some of those things I think are really powerful. They help me with having really strong visualization, and some of my visualizations, my doing spells and things like that, I think are very much empowered by that. So let's see here. So I think with this video, what I wanted to do was share that perspective, that to talk a little bit about the neurodiversity perspective or paradigm, and share, because there was a specific question about in our own practices, and share that as well. But I also wanted to comment on what I think a good therapist does, because I know that it might have sounded a little bit like I was kind of bashing on the whole profession, which I'm not at all. I just think that there's potential for abuse and things like that, but I think there's also potential for really great, positive partnerships to happen. So what I think that role is, at least what I would be looking for myself, would be somebody who would be there to help me thrive. Somebody who, some of the qualities that they, I think, would really need to have, or skills, would be able to separate their own shit from your shit and recognize that um, that what you're going through and your experiences and what you're saying um, is yours, right? And of course, people do bounce off of each other, but not stick their own experiences or assume that you're talking about something that you're not without really deeply listening to you. And I don't know, but I suspect that there's a little of that happening in this particular situation where maybe they are threatened by the idea of paganism and the religion. It might be a little threatening because it's a challenge to their authority. There might be a little bit of an appropriate authority relationship going on there. But I think that a therapist or a healer or there's a lot of different terms, but somebody who's there to help you, that their job isn't to do something to you, but to help you to do to yourself, to help you to see something more clearly that you may not have been seeing before, to help you develop techniques um, to deal with challenges that you have, to help you strengthen your weaknesses and use your strengths in whatever the way is that's going to help you to thrive and nourish you and to help you identify what that is. And so I think that that role, that assistance that can be given can be really powerful, and that you deserve to have that. Whoever you are, like honestly, I think that you do. That everybody really does if that's something that they want. And if it's not working for you, you don't owe. Like, there's different styles of therapists, and if it doesn't work for you, then find somebody who does. And I know it's not always that easy, especially when things like insurance are involved. And when there isn't really full consent, especially when you're a minor and somebody's making you do something that you don't want to, which is its own problem that I kind of touched on a little bit earlier. But if it doesn't work for you, find somebody who does. So yeah, I guess I went in a little bit of a different direction. I hope this didn't go too long. Please check out those links that I mentioned. And I think it's Subs Week next week. So I will see you next month and hope everyone had a wonderful summer solstice.